In this video, I will create yet another simple app. This time, the focus is on using fxml and a controller rather than manually setting up the UI elements through code. I have the app open here and I realize it's a bit small, but setting my desktop scaling messed up the layout, so, well, you'll notice the transfer button is currently disabled because there is no text to transfer. I can input some text, the button becomes enabled, and then I can click the transfer button to take the text from the text field and put it into the label at the bottom. The clear button will just clear any text. Let's implement this with an fxml file and a controller for the behavior. I have a module ready and I will just start by creating an fxml file calling it my example. I will postpone the controller until I have finished the fxml file. So first let's flesh out that file through the scene builder and let me just open it here. I have an anchor pane by default, that's fine, I will just keep that. Let me just find the UI we're looking for here. We can notice 3 rows of elements and I will create that with a VBox, dragging that onto the anchor pane. There is some sizing I will fix shortly. Next, the text field. Now 2 buttons, but those will be stacked vertically. So let me just wrap them in an H-box so they are on a horizontal line. And a label at the bottom. But it's currently a bit of a mess, so let me fix some layout here. First, the anchor pane. I want that to have a width of 200 and computed height. Then VBox, the width is 200. And the height is use computed size to make it resize to the necessary height. I will add padding of 10 on all 4 sides and a spacing of 10 as well. The text field should have a computed size to make it fit. And now the H-box, also making sure it uses computed size. I will leave the padding and margin as 0, that's fine. The buttons, each with a width of 100, so they will fill out the available horizontal space. The first button will be called transfer. And the second button will be called clear. And then the label, I will make it 180 pixels wide and center the text as well as center alignment. And I will just remove the default text too. That should be it for the layout and visual styling. Next, let's hook this up for my code. I need to be able to retrieve the text from the text field. That requires that I have a reference to the text field, and that is done by giving the text field an ID. And then adding a field variable in the controller class with that same ID and an appropriate type of text field, of course. So under the code tab, I need to set up an ID for the text field. The code tab is where we bind together UI elements and the code. Let's call this input field. That should be clear. I also need to set the text of the label. So in a similar manner, I am going to need a reference to the label object. And again, that's done by giving the label an ID. Let's call it output label. Now, for the first button, I want to define the method to be called on transfer button pressed, and the same for the second button on clear button pressed. And finally, I also need to react to the text being put into the text field. I do that by selecting the text field, and then under the code tab, I find the event called onKeyReleased and add the name of the method I want to be called. On input field key released. That's probably good. And that should be all for the code part. Finally, I can define the controller class here. We can actually see below which field variables are expected in the controller, though the table is a bit squished. But I see I forgot an ID for the transfer button, so let's just quick fix that. I need this ID so I can have a reference to the button which will allow me to disable or enable it. And that should be it. So I save it and head back to IntelliJ. And the file is updated. You will probably first notice the parts with red text indicating some kind of error. So first let's auto create the controller. I can either use the little red light bulb or just Alt enter on the name and create the class. Next, notice the yellow squiggly line indicating there is no matching field in the controller. Not specifically an error, but still a problem. And I want that field, so quick fix to edit. It gives us a public field variable. You can make it private if you want to, and that means you need to annotate it with fxml like this. But I will just leave it public, that's fine. Then the method to be called upon a key being released when typing in the text field. By default, it creates a method with a key event argument, but I don't care about the argument and can just remove it. Moving on to the transfer button and its method. And finally the label. Good, now we have connected the fxml to the controller and we can implement the rest of the controller. So first, I want the transfer button to be disabled by default. Normally such an initial setting is the job for a constructor, but specifically for JavaFX controller classes, we cannot just include a constructor. It will cause a runtime exception when trying to instantiate the controller. There are ways around this, so you can still have a constructor, but that's not for this video. A simpler alternative when you want to run some code immediately after creation is to implement the initializable interface, which comes with a single method like this. And I just realized I'm missing a method here. Okay, back to the initialize method. This method is automatically called for us after the controller has been created. So here I will just disable the transfer button like this. Next, let's enable or disable the button based on whether there is text in the input field. I do this in the onInputFieldKeyReleased method, which is called whenever a key is released when we are typing in the text field. And we're just checking if there is anything in the text field. Moving on to the behavior of the transfer text button, transferring the text and clearing the text field. And because the text field is now empty, I disable the transfer button. And finally the clear button, just clearing the text on both label and text field, just to be sure. And again disabling the transfer button. And I seem to have this particular code several places. There is actually a better approach using something called properties, but that's a bit more advanced and definitely out of scope of this video. Some other time perhaps. So that's all for the controller. Now let's actually make this run by creating my usual runapp class. There is a specific class which will take an fxml file, set up the UI, instantiate the controller and tie everything together. That is the fxml loader. Here I will just use the simplest approach. The static load method requires a path, specifically a URL, pointing to the fxml file. A common approach is to provide the relative path, in this case relative to this runapp class. So it looks like this: get class, then get resource and the name of the fxml file. The path to the fxml file is relative to this runapp, and in the package hierarchy we can see they're just in the same package. Therefore I do not need to navigate anywhere up or down into parent or child folders when giving the file location. The file name is enough. Had the fxml file been in a subpackage, for example, I had to prefix that package name in the path. We may see this in a later video. So the result of calling the load method is the root element specified in the fxml file. In my case that was an anchor pane, but for simplicity's sake it is easier to just declare the variable type as a superclass for the pane. The parent type is generally a good approach. It is the superclass for all nodes that we can put into the scene. Next I create a scene with the parent object, setting the scene onto the stage and showing the stage. And now let's test it. Notice how the transfer button is disabled, but inputting text enables it. I can transfer the text and I can clear the text. And that's all for this video. It is a very simple introduction to how to use fxml files and controllers together, and I will expand upon this in later videos. But for now, thanks for watching.